Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, Israeli jets fire at Lebanon and Gaza after rocket attacks. We've got details. Plus,
we take you to Italy for the first look at the new film, The Journey, from Andrea Bocelli and friends.
My prayer is that it encourages people on their own journeys. We are all on a journey. And the beautiful thing about it is that we're not on the journey alone. That Jesus is walking with us hand in hand. All we have to do is follow.
Then later, Good Friday is here, and we share an interesting fact from the Bible. Jesus quoted one of the Psalms word for word when he was near his death.
Once you read Psalm 22, you cannot separate it from the crucifixion.
All these stories and more coming up next from the CBN Newsroom.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin this half hour with Israeli jets attacking targets in Lebanon and the Gaza Strip overnight. The strikes come after Palestinian groups fired 34 rockets into Israel. It is the biggest attack since the 2006 Second Lebanon War. CBN's Chris Mitchell reports now from Jerusalem.
Israeli jets pounded weapons manufacturing sites, tunnels, and rocket launchers on both its northern and southern borders. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu convened Israel's Security Cabinet Thursday to respond to the attacks that came on the first day of Passover, when Jews celebrate their deliverance from Egypt. Netanyahu warned Israel's foes.
Recently, I've made it clear that our enemies should not misjudge us. The internal debate in Israel will not prevent us from taking action against them wherever and whenever necessary. All of us, without exception, are united on this.
Benny Gantz, former IDF chief of staff and now head of the National Unity Party, also emphasized that the country stands united. It's rare for Israel to hit targets in Lebanon, and Israeli leaders hold the Lebanese government responsible for attacks from its territory. However, the Iranian-backed terror group Hezbollah controls vast areas of Lebanon. Hezbollah leader Sheikh Nasrallah warned Israel about clashes with Palestinians on Jerusalem's Temple Mount, and said his group would support all measures taken by the Palestinians. So far, Hezbollah has not claimed responsibility for the rockets, but Middle East experts agree any attacks would require their approval. The fighting began Tuesday night on the Temple Mount, when Muslim men barricaded themselves inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque, a situation Middle East expert Jonathan Conricus told CBN News was part of a premeditated plan by Hamas and other terror groups.
What they're basically trying to do is to create an impossible situation on the Temple Mount in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, for there to be confrontations, as there were tonight, and then for outrage to be generated in the Muslim world and for escalation to start happening.
These confrontations often take place during the month-long Muslim observance of Ramadan. Middle East experts say it's telling that so far Israel has not struck Hezbollah targets. It's likely they may want to avoid bringing Iran's proxy militia into a confrontation that could lead to war. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Chris, thank you. I want to turn now to Tennessee and a political firestorm after the State House voted to expel 3 members for disruptive behavior. Accusations of stifling free speech and racism followed when the body voted to expel 2 black lawmakers and not a white one. Earlier this week, 3 Democrats took over the House floor and led chants with protesters in the gallery to pressure debate on gun reform. Leaders in the Republican-led chamber charged all 3 with disorderly behavior and violating decorum and held votes to expel them. Tennessee's Republican House Speaker defended the votes and said race was not a factor. In the past, the Tennessee House has expelled members for unlawful conduct. The calls for gun reform taking place now, less than 2 weeks after a gunman killed 6 people in a Nashville elementary school. All 63 members of a Chinese church fleeing persecution are on their way to America. Bob Fu of China Aid helped to organize the campaign for freedom, and he confirms to CBN News they are expected to arrive at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport tonight. The Christians fled China 3 years ago, first to South Korea and then to Thailand as they sought asylum in the United States. CBN News visited the congregation in Bangkok last year to tell their story. In recent days, Thai police took the group into custody and reportedly planned to deport them because their visas had expired. Religious freedom activists said the U.S. State Department played an important part in working with Thai officials to have them sent to the U.S. instead of China. A Texas group that assists people with seeking religious freedom will help them to resettle in the city of Tyler, Texas. Fu said this is truly a Good Friday blessing for the persecuted faithful in China and around the world. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are demanding answers from the White House as new information suggests the Chinese spy balloon was able to collect much more intelligence than the administration first admitted. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke is on this story.
We know now the balloon's week-long trip across the U.S. allowed it to collect intelligence from sensitive military sites, despite efforts by the Biden administration to block that capability. Media reports citing administration sources also maintain China controlled the balloon as it made multiple passes over some sites, collecting information from the electronic signals transmitted from things like weapon systems and on-base communications.
Good afternoon.
We had the President of the United States saying that he was not concerned about this. There's nothing to worry about. Folks shouldn't be anxious.
The Pentagon insists any information gathered by Beijing was of, quote, limited additive value. But Victoria Coates, a former U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor, says the most valuable intelligence China gained likely came from the initial lack of U.S. response to the balloon.
I would assume they thought that the thing would be shot down over Alaska, and that would teach them one thing. But what they learned was they could fly this thing with impunity across the continental United States.
The balloon contained a self-destruct mechanism that could have been activated remotely by China. It's unclear whether it malfunctioned or wasn't activated. Regardless, Coates believes it communicates how frantic China is for information on the U.S.
I think from their perspective, it shows that they were in this to get as much as they could out of the balloon, that protecting the balloon or destroying its sensitive materials was less important to them than seeing how far they could get and what they could gather.
Republican and Democratic lawmakers alike want the Biden administration to do more to protect Americans.
If you take a look at the path that balloon took, there was nothing accidental about it. They were gathering information. I don't know how much they got at this moment in time, but I'm sure we'll find out as time moves on. But the fact is, it was inappropriate behavior.
Coates sees this as a basic national security issue and hopes Congress can unite around it. She's joining in the calls for the Biden administration to start communicating accurate information to those who gave them the job, the American people. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Making plans with your family this weekend? Consider going to the theaters to see The Journey. It's a music special from Andrea Bocelli, and it's filled with world-class performances, intimate conversations, all along an awe-inspiring Italian countryside. We're going to give you a first look at The Journey and sit down with Torrin Wells, who is one of those world-class performers who's a part of the film.
Our life is very short, but at the same time, it's a miracle.
A glimpse at The Journey with Andrea Bocelli, in theaters now through Easter Sunday. In it, he and his wife pilgrim through Italy's Tuscan countryside, meeting some of their favorite performers along the way, like Tori Kelly, Taya, and Torrin Wells.
I decided to make this journey now because nature is the biggest miracle.
Torrin, it's always a joy to talk to you. First, let's begin with this. Describe getting the invitation from Andrea Bocelli to be in Italy. What was that like?
It was unbelievable. I really didn't even have any concept that this would be an actual reality, but my yes was automatic, and it was an amazing time getting over there, spending time with them. And to really see this whole project come to fruition has been amazing. It's a stunning film.
People have called the time that we're living in right now the age of fear. And so what better weapon to keep our hearts fixed on the peace of God than music?
Andrea described you as a keeper of light. What was it like to hear that as far as your testimony goes?
I thought that was such a beautiful way to describe a believer. Mm-hmm. And really, we're all keepers of the light, but we're also distributors of the light. And, I think of that verse that Paul writes, and he says that you were once darkness, but now you are light. So live as children of the light. The light consists of goodness, righteousness, and truth.
You are a Texas boy and you had never ridden a horse?
Well, I grew up in Michigan, which explains a lot. So, yeah, it was cool that day. I just posted a video on my Instagram, actually, of them teaching me how to ride that day. But not only did I have to ride the horse, I also had to sing a song while riding the horse. So it was no small feat, for sure.
I think of all those that they asked, you were the only one tasked with having to ride and sing at the same
Apparently. Well, I was the only one who made it in the movie singing on the horse, so I don't know what that says.
True. Very true. What is your prayer for the journey as it now is not only released but extended in theaters for people to watch? What's your prayer for it?
My prayer is that it encourages people on their own journeys, because, you know, obviously we're not all on horseback, thank God, but we are all on a journey. And the beautiful thing about it is that we're not on the journey alone, that Jesus is walking with us hand in hand. All we have to do is follow. And no matter how treacherous the path, no matter how difficult, how high the hills, how low the valleys, that he's going to be there with us through it all, and that he's going to see it through. He's going to see us through, and we're going to make it. We have the promise of heaven as our great reward, and his grace is going to carry us to that day.
Indeed. The film is beautiful. You can see it through Easter weekend at a theater near you. Coming up, the connection between Psalm 22 and Jesus' crucifixion. That story for you is coming up next. On this Good Friday, here is one interesting fact from the Bible. Did you know Jesus quoted the start of one of the Psalms word for word when he was near death on the cross? That same Psalm describes how his hands and feet would be pierced and gave more specifics about Christ's crucifixion. Paul Strand reports on how seeing all of this can take your faith from shaky to sure.
Some believe Jesus was crucified at the base of the hill behind me, now home to a bus parking lot here in Jerusalem. Well, 2,000 years ago, when Jesus was hanging on a cross there, he said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When as a new Christian I read that, it really shook my faith, because it kind of sounded like Jesus was losing his. Well, when you find out what's actually going on with those words, rather than shake your faith, it may well supercharge it. Jesus was quoting Psalm 22, verse 1, word for word. While he could hardly breathe up on the cross, with those few words he was saying, go read Psalm 22. Since it was written 1,000 years before Christ's birth, and also before crucifixion was invented, Psalm 22 is an amazing prophetic look at exactly what would happen that historic crucifixion day, down to the tiny details. I went through it verse by verse with Bishop Bart Pierce of Baltimore, Maryland's Rock City Church. First off, Jesus knew he wasn't being forsaken. He volunteered to make this blood sacrifice because as a pure Lamb of God, he was the only one who could take away the sins of all mankind by shedding his perfect blood for them.
He was the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. It's the purest lamb there's ever been. There was no purer blood than his blood.
But because a holy God can't be in the presence of sin,
And he was turning his face because he couldn't look at sin.
King David describes Christ on the cross declaring, I cry out by day, but you do not answer, by night, and am not silent. Pierce points out how Christ was crying out from the cross, both in the day and night, as God turned the world dark for 3 hours.
Well, when darkness came on the earth, it says, and there was thundering and lightning, and the earth shook.
Verse 12 says, strong bulls of Bashan encircle me. That's likely symbolic talk for the beefy, bull-like Roman soldiers who tortured Jesus and nailed him to the cross. By the way, when it says strong bulls encircle me, the phrase is better translated crown me. Remember, it was the Roman soldiers who jammed a crown of thorns onto Jesus' head. Jews in that day referred to Gentiles as dogs, and verse 16 says, dogs have surrounded me, a band of evil men has encircled me, they have pierced my hands and my feet. Psalms 22, 1,000 years in advance, perfectly describes Roman Gentiles nailing Christ's hands and feet to the cross.
Before that was ever even thought about.
Verse 18 says, they divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing. King David prophetically describes the Romans both dividing and casting lots for Christ's garments. And his description of the agony caused by crucifixion is eerily accurate. Verse 14, I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax. It has melted away within me.
All your liquids run out of your body and they go to your feet.
Verse 15, my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth.
He would have become so parched of mouth, he was losing his liquids in his body.
Verses 7 and 8 say, all who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let the Lord rescue him. Then listen to how Matthew 27 describes what actually happened. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads, and the elders mocked him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him.
David had a divine revelation, and you can no longer, once you read Psalm 22, you cannot separate it from the crucifixion.
Verses 30 and 31 conclude the psalm by describing a faith going on into the ages, saying future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness to a people yet unborn, for he has done it. And Pierce shares how the psalm delivers a final surprising revelation.
It says there in the Amplified, that last statement in verse 31, it doesn't say it's done. It says the word, it is finished. And that's the very word that Jesus used, it is finished.
So Jesus on the cross said the exact first words of Psalm 22, and his final words were the exact last words of that psalm. He was definitely pointing us to this amazing 1,000-year-old prophecy about his death and its eternal results. Paul Strand, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Still ahead, free speech under fire. See what's being done to protect our rights next. Cancel culture, book banning, shouting down public speakers, you name it. Free speech is under attack in our country, and along with it, the American way of life. Jennifer Wishon reports on this rising threat to democracy.
In America, even the most vile speech is protected. It's one of the first guarantees the founders bestowed upon American citizens in the Bill of Rights. Today, however, through censorship, banning books, and the new art of heckling speakers into silence, free speech is under attack like never before. So
what is going on here? I mean, what is the fear of having different ideas out there?
If you can deny citizens the opportunity to hear the truth, to challenge falsehood and lies, you can imprison people, not physically necessarily, but in a prison of lies and falsehoods. And that's one of the most profound forms of unfreedom that any human can experience, is living a life of lies.
As Senior Vice President of Alliance Defending Freedom, Ryan Bangert has a front row seat to the anti-free speech movement. He says it's speeding up and spreading to other sectors of the economy, like banking.
Take, for instance, my own organization, Alliance Defending Freedom. Fidelity Charitable made it more difficult for donors to give to ADF through their DAF accounts, simply because we are a religious freedom organization.
There are calls from both sides of the aisle to ban certain books many people find offensive, a practice some liken to the burning of books in Nazi Germany. Others celebrate efforts by social media companies to censor hateful speech, silence so-called misinformation, and ban people's accounts. The problem is everyone's threshold of what's hateful or dangerous is different, and sometimes misinformation turns out to be true. This spring, the president of West Texas A&M University canceled a student-organized drag show citing his religious beliefs, calling such shows derisive, divisive, and demoralizing misogyny. And even if you agree, critics warn a university president's personal beliefs can't be the standard. If that's the case, then student-led prayer could be next. Some calls for censorship and stifling of speech come from the very institutions designed to protect them. Take a bill passed by the House designed to prevent domestic terrorism after a shooting at a supermarket in New York. Critics argue the legislation could enable the Justice Department to target parents who disagree with their school boards. Jonathan Turley, law professor at the George Washington School of Law and constitutional scholar, testified against the bill.
Fortunately, even though we live in dangerous times, we have a constitution designed for bad times, not good times. Indeed, The Constitution was written in the worst of times.
He points out similar laws already exist in Europe. Turley points to England, where he writes even a silent prayer is a criminal offense when done near an abortion clinic, and points to a European man recently convicted of a thought crime. The neo-Nazi was given a 4-year sentence for what the court called his toxic ideology, based on the contents of the home he shared with his mother, and continues, while most of us find Brock's views repellent and hateful, they were confined to his head and his room. At the World Economic Forum in January, the vice president of the European Commission predicted European hate speech laws will soon be the law of the land in the U.S.
Because what qualifies as hate speech, as illegal hate speech, which you will have soon also in the U.S., I think that we have a strong reason why we have this in the criminal law.
Some scholars warn Americans can't assume the Constitution is indestructible.
Persons of certain faiths or beliefs, increasingly Christians, but also those of other faiths, are being frozen out of the marketplace simply because of the ideas they hold. And that is profoundly wrong. It's un-American. It's also contrary to the principles of the free market.
Even the founders disagreed at times over how the First Amendment should be applied. And while different opinions will persist, many people say it's important to preserve this freedom deemed central to being American. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Stay with us. Your Friday Faithful is coming up next. Time now for your Faithful Friday on this Good Friday. And in case you didn't know, or it's just not top of mind for you, 3 words to remember this Easter weekend: just for me. Jesus came and did it just for me. He came from heaven to earth. He died and he rose, and he did it just for me. Speak those 3 words to yourself all weekend long and meditate on them as well. Just for me. That's going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can always find more of our programs on the CBN News channel at any time, as well as online at cbnnews.com. We would love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today or any day. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com, and reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Have yourself a wonderful Resurrection weekend. We'll see you Monday.